guys, and welcome back to the Vanishing Hour. Today's case is one that I've had on the back burner for about a year. It's always stood out to me, but I never really covered it until now because of the severe lack of public information that can be found about it. I kind of just hoped that sometime between then and now more information would become available, but that has not been the case. Regardless, though, the time has come to do this one. It's just been gnawing at me, and today we are going to talk about it. Again, the lack of information is disturbing and odd to me, but I guess that just opens up the door for more digging into tangents, which is sometimes useful. We will go over the basic outline of the case and what is known, and then we will sort of splinter off from there. I am hoping to give the case the best that I can, which is only a sliver of what I believe it rightfully deserves. So with that, let's dive into the vanishing of Lawrence Groves. There's little known about Lawrence Groves other than this. He preferred to go by Larry, and so Larry is what we will call him. The internet puts his birthday at July 10th, 1962, making him 40 years old at the time of his death. According to online sources, when Larry was 18 and residing in Lakeville, Indiana, he met a man by the name of Thomas Bennett. Tom, as we will call him, was much older than Larry, and if I mathed correctly, he was about 30-ish years older than Larry. Despite his age gap, though, there was an instant attraction. The two hit it off immediately and began a relationship. Shortly after, Larry moved into a bungalow with Tom in Lakeville that Tom had owned. Now, some of my research stated that the couple were similar in almost as many ways as they were different. Tom had a passion for antique collecting and things like that, and so he shared that knowledge and passion with Larry, who in turn developed his own passion for it, and that kind of became their thing that they did together. How they differed, though, was how they expressed themselves. Tom was more of a brutish, manly type who was rough and abrasive and aggressive if anyone gave him shit in the conservative town that they lived in. Larry was the opposite of that. He was described as flamboyant, and he stood out in a crowd. He would wear whatever jewelry he fancied, which included earrings and multiple flashy bracelets, and he wasn't one to shy away from a fur coat or other gaudy clothing. He was just expressive in his style. The couple even started their own short-lived gay newspaper in town called Partners Rainbow. Larry was usually the target for a lot of the harassment that the couple received around town for being gay, mainly because of the fact that he was more avoiding of confrontation rather than invoking it like Tom was. On top of that, him being the more flamboyant one. This didn't mean that Larry was a pushover, though. Several of his friends described him as a, quote, no-nonsense person who either you loved or you completely hated, which, honestly, Larry, same. Larry grew thick skin, and he learned to adapt to people and knew what to take and what not to take from them, and you have to respect that. Both Larry and Tom often visited Florida for antique-related business or conventions, and they were linked to various areas, including Mississippi and other parts of Indiana. They always mentioned leaving the area for a more LGBT-friendly environment. However, from what I gathered, the couple remained in the Lakeville/South Bend area for family and the fact that they had a home there. Sadly, in 2001, Tom passed away from what I believe was a heart attack at the age of 70. This deeply impacted Larry and his life. As if things weren't hard enough at the time living in a society that was not accepting of his identity, he had just lost his life partner. After Tom's passing, Larry began to wear his bracelet with him every day as a token of his love for his partner and friend that he so dearly missed. A man by the name of Durrell Bennett, who most sources say was Tom's father, although I could not for the life of me find anything that tied the two of them together, retained the house that Larry and Tom had been living in. I don't know if it was Durrell's home to begin with and he just let the two of them live there, or if it was Tom's and Durrell was like the default inheritor of it after Tom passed away. But regardless, Durrell allowed Larry to continue to live in the home after Tom's passing for as long as he wanted. It is unclear what the status of the relationship between Durrell and his son Tom was. I couldn't find anything to confirm or deny that the two had a healthy relationship. To be honest with you, I couldn't even find anything that confirmed a Durrell existed. I was able to confirm Larry and Tom, but I could not find Durrell, which was kind of odd for me, but I guess it's not really relevant. But I am going to assume that Durrell was aware of the relationship between his son and Larry and had to approve on some level if he allowed Larry to live there after his son's passing. But we will swing around to Durrell again, don't worry. So after Tom's passing, Larry had to continue to move forward, now living in the home alone with his cherished dogs Dixie, Ruby, and Pepper. Dixie, the oldest of the three, would eventually pass away from old age in December of 2002, leaving Larry with Ruby and Pepper, who were his family. Larry's close friends stated that even though Larry himself was a vegetarian, whenever going out with friends, he would always bag up their meaty leftovers and bring them home for, quote, the girls, as he referred to them. He loved his dogs and he was very attached to them. Aside from his passion for his fur babies, Larry also continued to develop his passion for antiques. It was something he and Tom had bonded over for many years when, like I mentioned, Tom had introduced Larry to the high-end antique world. This led Larry to open his own antique shop in town, which essentially became his third baby. He was equally attentive to his business as he was to his dogs. Like the house, the dogs and the business all become majorly vital in this case from this point on. Which brings us to the events that transpired on January 12, 2003. A common ritual of Larry's was to share in a late-night phone call with his close friend Sandy. Sandy lived in Biloxi, Mississippi. Their main form of communication were these late-night conversations they often had. At about 11 p.m. this particular evening, Larry and Sandy were chatting it up over the phone and were about 10 minutes into their conversation when suddenly in the background of the phone call, Sandy could hear a loud banging on the door of Larry's home, accompanied by a male voice demanding to be let in. Larry tells Sandy who it is, a name which has never been publicly released, by the way. It says that he will deal with him and then call her back in 20 minutes before he subsequently hangs up the phone. Sandy waited for the call back from Larry, but it never came. In fact, that phone call was the last anyone had heard from Larry. Now, it's unclear what exactly Sandy did after this. I wasn't able to find anything that stated she got concerned and called him back, and when he didn't respond, she reached out to family or friends to check on him or maybe alert the police. I mean, if I was on a call with a friend or family member and I can audibly hear chaos knocking at their door and they tell me I'll call you back and they don't, my ass is in the car 20 minutes later driving down there. Or at the minimum, calling people to come check on you. Now, we can't say she didn't do that, but given the limited information available, it doesn't indicate that that happened. Does that make her guilty? No. Not to me. Maybe a little slow to action, possibly teetering on the edge of being a shoddy-ass friend, but not guilty. Hindsight's a bitch, I'm sure, for her. Now, as the days ticked by, Larry's antique business began to fall on the wayside of things. It seems the first person who noticed something was amiss with Larry was his mother, Wanda. She hadn't heard from him and decided to ask around to see if anyone else had. When the responses came back as no, on January 28th, nearly 3 weeks later, Wanda reported Larry missing. Now, what's bothering me is the fact that there are no records of anyone entering the home until April. I'm not sure if the police conducted a search before then or if the family did, but according to the only newspaper article covering this case, nearly 4 years after the fact, it states that the police entered the home along with Larry's sister, Pam, sometime in April. A whole ass 3 months after this ominous phone call and Larry disappearing. The house was locked and there was no signs of forced entry or anything odd inside the house. They ultimately reported finding nothing of evidentiary value. However, they also found no sign of Ruby and Pepper. Now, one could assume that maybe they were operating on the notion that he's an antique guy who travels for work on occasion. Maybe he's gone and took, the pups with him. But I would be like, okay, if that's the case, why is there no one handling the business in his absence? And also, why did he not let anyone know? This seems like a man who does communicate with his family and friends on some sort of regular basis. Memorial Weekend, which is the end of May, was a big holiday for Tom and Larry. When Tom was still alive, the couple made a point to invite friends and family over to their home for a barbecue cookout. It sounds like after Tom's passing, Larry did continue that tradition. However, by the time Memorial Weekend swung around and no one had still heard from or seen Larry, Mama Wanda started to get really anxious and worried. Wherever her son was, at this point, she had hoped it was just a misunderstanding or a lack of communication and he was maybe on a trip. But when no Memorial Day cookout happened, Wanda knew then that Larry wouldn't communicate anything to them unless he had no opportunity to. So Wanda decided to do some of her own investigative digging. She drove by Larry's bungalow and scoped it out. She also entered the home, looked around, and again found nothing odd or out of place. There was no sign of Larry, though, or his dogs. She states in the newspaper article that she sat at his desk, rifled through his papers and belongings, and just saw nothing helpful or suspicious, and subsequently left even more confused than she was before. Things remained like this until June 18, 2003, a whole 5 months after anyone last heard or spoke with Larry. June 18th was a culmination of things that led to a terrifying discovery for Larry's neighbor, Dick. If you were standing out on the street facing Larry's home, Dick lived in the house to the right of Larry's. They shared a property fence, and Dick was maybe no more than 50 yards from Larry's front door, and vice versa. Anyways, Dick noticed that he hadn't seen much of Larry over the past several months. I'm not completely sure if he was aware that he was missing by this point or not, but he had noticed Larry's absence. Larry and Tom were active in their community, and after Tom's passing, that didn't change for Larry. He was still an active member in the community and was seen often around town. Anyway, Dick does notice, though, that despite Larry's physical absence from the property, there have been vehicles coming and going from the residence, yet no Larry among them. He did know that Larry and Tom dabbled in the antique business, and so it wasn't odd for people to come by and pick up or deliver antiques to the home, and so Dick kind of just chalked that activity up to that. However, when June rolled around and the lack of Larry's presence started to directly impact Dick. Like I said, they shared a property fence. Trees, peach trees in particular, lined Larry's side of the yard. He was usually good at keeping them turned back and away from Dick's yard. However, by this point, they were well over the property line and dropping rancid fruit into Dick's yard. There was also a notable increase in insect and bird activity around the house. Dick recalled there being an increased presence of blackbirds, like crows, just chilling over the property. It began to cause gross issues like bird shit lining his driveways and whatnot. There was also a massive uptick in bees in the area too, which made it impossible to let Dick's dogs out into the yard because they were just getting stung repeatedly. Dick came to the conclusion that the birds and bugs must be flocking to the area because of the rancid fruit. Without Larry to contact, he decides to start fixing the problem himself. He begins trimming back the trees and shrubbery and cleaning up the rotten fruit in hopes that the bugs and the birds will eventually go away. However, this doesn't seem to alleviate the issue. He starts to think that maybe they're targeting Larry's yard in particular. So Dick decides to take a peek over the fence and get a better idea of the situation. He notices a few things. While the overgrown yard is an issue with the fruit and the shit and the bees, something weirder catches his eye. A window low to the ground on Larry's house catches his eye. Not quite a basement window, but also not a normal ground floor window either. Dick has seen the window plenty of times in the past while Larry was still around. He knows what the window usually looks like. This time, though, the window is very different from what he remembers. Initial gandering suggests to Dick that someone has painted the window from the inside black. Which is odd, right? What would be the purpose of that? And with Larry MIA, who would have done that and why? But just as soon as he noticed the black window, he noticed something else. The insects that were flying around on Larry's side of the property were not bees, but in fact giant bullflies. And there were tons of them. They were flying in the air, they were feasting on the fruit, they were being eaten by the birds, they were lining the sides of Larry's yellow and white trimmed bungalow. They were swarming the side panel of the house so hard that the panel looked black to Dick. Suddenly, he realized that the black window was not painted black. It was a wall of bullflies bum-rushing the window in an attempt to escape the enclosed area they were in. Seeing this, Dick was like, oh fuck, we got a serious problem, and it reaches far beyond bird shit and rotten fruit. His initial reaction is to call Durrell, the homeowner, and Tom's father, which, okay, but like flies and crows, we should be calling the police, and they should be bringing CSI and the coroner's office. We are not calling Durrell. What the fuck is Durrell going to do? But anyway, Durrell is called, I guess, so that they can get access to the home and they can find out what's causing the flies. Which, let's be real here, flies and crows equal dead something. Whether it's a dead human or a dead animal, either way, it's not good and it's dead. And again, we need something bigger than an 80-year-old Durrell. Regardless, Durrell arrives and him and Dick enter the home. They are immediately bombarded with the massive stench of rotting something. They are confused because they can't seem to find the source. Again, there's nothing out of place in the home. There's no signs of a struggle, no telltale anything. Someone decides to open the fridge and they find some rancid meat in there. And first reaction is maybe this is a culprit. But it still isn't adding up. Would the flies be coming from the fridge or the kitchen area if this was the cause of the stench and the fly Armageddon occurring? So they continue to investigate. Then, out of nowhere, it feels like Durrell is like, hey, wait, maybe we should check the secret hatch in the bedroom area. Maybe that's the cause. Okay. He doesn't say it that way, but again, limited information, and what info there is says that the police and family came to check the house. No mention of the secret hatch was ever made or searched prior to now, 5 months later, after Larry's disappearance. Now Durrell is like, hey, there's a secret hatch, let's go check it out. Now, being that Durrell is allegedly Tom's father, and we established that Tom was 70-ish when he died, that puts Durrell up in his age, so maybe memory issues played a role in this. I don't know, but to say it bothers me that it's been 5 months since anyone was aware of or checks this crawl space hidden door hatch in the home of a missing man would be an understatement. Anyway, the hatch is located under a rug that is completely concealed by Larry's desk. It literally sits right on top of it. So again, you wouldn't know this was there unless you were looking for it or had prior knowledge of its existence. Keep that in mind. Inside the trap door is the severely decomposed remains of Larry Groves. Severely. The police are immediately called and they arrive on scene. They take samples off of Larry, including hair and blood samples, and the crawl space area as well. I'm sure there had to be a level of embarrassment or guilt at the fact that they had missed this in their prior searches. There had to be the question of how did nobody know this area existed, or why wasn't it searched? Why did we not smell anything for the past 5 months? I know these are all questions I'm having, and I have some slight suspicions as to why, but we will get into that. Larry's body is taken to the medical examiner, and due to the condition of it, the examiner is unable to determine what the cause of death was. So, Now that this is no longer a missing persons case, the investigation should take a much more different approach, and to an extent it does. They go back and they recomb through everything they have so far, the home, the business, witness accounts, etc. That includes Sandy's last phone call with Larry back in January. Luckily, Larry told Sandy that night who was banging on the door. Sandy relayed the name to the police. Again, name is unknown to us. And with that, they also speak to family and friends, and police apparently pull this guy into the station for questioning. Their recount of what took place is this. They say that they brought the guy in and explained the situation and began asking their questions. They said that, quote, there wasn't much reaction and that he was pretty much cold and calculated. He never lost his composure. We never got much of a rise out of him. He kept going back to, you guys are not listening to me. I told you what happened, so I'm not going to say anything else until I get my lawyer. The police claim the interview ended then. They did say that they have evidence that this particular person continued to sell valuable antiques after Larry went missing, but that along with the angry banging on the door, this is all just circumstantial evidence, and it's not strong enough to take to a judge or a jury. So my mind then immediately jumps to, okay, they have that DNA evidence that they collected. What became of that? Well, according to the article, in late November of 2006, the DNA came back from the FBI crime lab. The results concluded that DNA collected did not conclusively match the DNA of this particular person. That obviously throws a wrench into things here, but I wouldn't say it completely eliminates him either. At the time of the publication of this article, which was June of 2007, the police stated that they may have more evidence to test and that their next step was to examine the lab reports. Obviously, there hasn't been anything mentioned since. I'd imagine that didn't pan out for them like they had hoped. The closing statement of this article is titled, No Public Outrage, and that is honestly the truth. It was the truth back then, and it appears to be the truth now, nearly 20 years later. I've researched a lot of cases, and 99.9% of the cases that I've researched have a common thread. They have a voice fighting for justice and answers. Some voices are louder and stronger than others. Some are from family, friends, some are the community that the victim was a part of, church members, or even strangers that were touched by the story and want to help. What I find equally heartbreaking and disturbing is that there's nothing that I can reasonably find within my capabilities that equals a voice for Larry. There is this one article from 2007 that gives the most information. There is a face on a playing card deck that is distributed in prisons and jails. And then there's this Reddit thread. I scoured Facebook, social media for family or friends, hashtags calling for justice for Larry, community groups, pictures, something for this poor man, and it's just dead silence. Now, I know that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It's just in this day and age, it's far more uncommon for there to be nothing than there is to be something. And it's part of what has driven me to cover a case with such little information available. I found myself irked by all the other coverings of this case. No offense to anyone out there that has covered it in the past, but they felt like half-assed attempts to just zero effort for any actual resolution. I get that podcasts provide a certain level of entertainment for listeners, and that's a given, but I would hope with podcasts like mine, and especially mine, that there's a goal in mind. A goal for mine is always awareness at minimum. Be aware that these were real people, that they had an impact on the world, and that they were unfairly removed from it. They leave behind friends and family that hopefully love and miss them and just want their loved ones remembered, respected, and hopefully provided justice in some measure. And if there's a community for Larry out there, and I just somehow completely missed it, by all means reach out. I want to be a part of it and I want to help. That is all. I have said my piece. Let us continue. So, knowing that as of today, there appears to be no resolution in this case, let's discuss some things that stood out for me and possibly for you as well. A lot of these issues stem from just, again, lack of information and could maybe be reasonably answered with more information, but I doubt that will be the case, so we are operating on what we do know. I had a hard time with Sandy. I'd like to think for the most part she's a good woman. She sounds like for the most part she's a good friend and confidant of Larry's, which makes it all the more of an issue for me that she was seemingly not on the horn blowing up family and friends or even the police when Larry never called her back. A day later, several days later, a week later, whatever the case may be. Now, if you did do that, Sandy, and you're listening, I'm sorry. Good job. No hard feelings. But I am operating on what I have. Now, let's say she did reach out to the police. What the fuck then? What the fuck's going on, guys? Do we not do wellness checks, drive-bys, something? I wasn't in on the call, and even I am like, what the fuck happened? Can someone please check on Larry? Like, serious fumble number one on you guys. Now, not to dig too deep on this topic because it's has a lot of implications and assumptions, but by Larry's own account, this time in this town, it was very conservative, and judging by some of the recent happenings in the news that I researched, it is still a very conservative town. There doesn't seem to be a very strong LGBT community within the area. I read online that a library in the area was holding a pride event where children were welcome to come and finger paint, and book readings were going to be happening, and the event was supposed to be about inclusion and acceptance and love, and it was stormed by a very conservative group who demanded the event be stopped. The whole thing was recorded, and it was just really sad and hard to watch personally, and I think that this climate ties a lot back to the climate back then as well. Like I mentioned, Larry was often targeted for being gay. I don't know what level that harassment was at, if it was ever physical or violent in any way, but it does make you wonder if that played a role in the handling of the missing persons case and ultimately the lack of activity on this case since then. The second issue is the dogs. Like, where are they? I've played this out in my head several logical ways. You show up at this guy's house for whatever reason, whether premeditated or heat of the moment, and you end up murdering him. He's got 2 dogs who I'm sure went ape shit the second you laid hands on Larry, which is exactly what you don't want after murdering someone. Now Larry's dead, so what do we do with the dogs? Are they dead too? Because they weren't found in the crawl space with Larry or anywhere else on the property for that matter, which would mean either you took them, which seems weird to me. You kill Larry and leave him behind, but you make a point to take his dead dogs with you. It's a little reaching. Okay, so then what? You opened the door and let them out? Someone at some point had to have come across them, right? Did they end up at the local shelter? Did someone take them in? Did the police investigate this route? No one heard or saw these dogs out in the road or something. It's weird. As an officer, I feel like that would have been somewhere I looked into, hopefully the second he went missing. Doubtful, because for some reason, unless there is some serious suspicious circumstances around a disappearance of an adult, law enforcement has the tendency to assume that they are missing by their own choice. They probably assumed Larry took the pups with him and was on vacation. Now, once he was found in the crawl space, the dog avenue should have been thoroughly searched, in my opinion. We don't know if it was, though, so then that leaves us with you taking them with you and raising them as your own, being the only other option I can realistically think of. And again, that's odd. Did you kill Larry for his dogs then? Ruby and Pepper are such a huge mystery to me in this case, because it's just strange that they disappeared and have not been found. It also bothers me that given the proximity to the neighboring houses, nobody heard anything. Yes, I know it is completely possible that nobody did, but it still bothers me. I guess maybe because I am one of those hypersensitive neighbors whose ears perk up at the second of any yelling, thumping, or odd behavior. I am monitoring for several days for any suspicious activity. I will not stop until you resurface and make your presence known. The home, which I had to do some digging on as well, because the home will ultimately be a vital role in this case. sits on the main drag of the small town. It is sandwiched between two other properties that are, again, maybe 100 yards from each other. And it is the second house from the corner lot of an intersection. A small shopping center with a mom and pop storefront sits right across from the home as well. So it's by no means in the middle of absolute nowhere with miles of nothingness between it and civilization. Once I did find the address, I did Google map it, and I was fortunate enough to find images of it dating all the way back to 2007, which was 5 years after the events we are about to go over now. Judging by those pictures, I'm going to infer that the house may have had some overgrown foliage and trees and shrubbery that make it virtually impossible to see it from the street. It is a stark contrast from two neighboring properties on either side of the bungalow. You literally cannot see the front door because of all the trees. However, there is also an easily accessible alleyway that runs parallel to the main street out front, behind the house, as well as with direct access to driveways of all the houses lining it. On the other side of the alley, there's an open field and a children's park. Now, the alley doesn't have any, it's not fenced in or anything. It's literally just a paved street that runs parallel to behind all of these houses, and it's accessible from public roads too, which seems weird to me. It's just weird. Anyway, the third thing that bothered me is the trapdoor situation itself. We know that Larry went missing in January. Both family and police state that between both of them, the house was searched various times at various points in the missing persons investigation prior to Larry being found. Now, I can understand why police didn't know about the door if it wasn't in plain sight, but what I don't understand is how it wasn't located after some point. How did they not stumble upon it later during any of their searches? Family, I feel, would be more keen to knowing about it if anyone were to know, but it's completely possible it was just never brought up either. The only person we actively knew about it is Durrell. Durrell is the person who thought to look in it finally after the bugs showed up. Why Durrell didn't bring it to the attention of the police prior to this is odd, but again, given his older age, there is a factor of forgetfulness, etc., that we can excuse. That being said, though, if everyone who had been in the house knew nothing of the secret hiding place prior to Larry being found, that suggests two things to me. Either A, the perpetrator had prior knowledge of the hiding spot and utilized it, or B, Larry's desk was never above it prior to his death, and the suspect saw the door, opened it, and dumped Larry in after and threw the rug and desk over it. Those are the only two logical scenarios I can think of. No one in his family who had been in his house prior to his disappearance noted that the furniture had been moved or anything of that nature, though, and that being that no one saw the door and knew about it prior, that tells me his desk probably always sat right above the door and covered it. So whoever killed him, in my opinion, knew that the door was there, unless they just got extremely lucky and stumbled upon it. For police and others to completely miss it, it suggests nothing else other than prior knowledge or pure luck. The fourth issue I have with this case is, again, the lack of information. I've mentioned already, and I'll mention it again. I'm sure there's plenty of cases that this happens to. This is just my first. This happened in 2003. It is now 2022, and all that remains of Larry's case is a 2007 newspaper clipping. The article itself even states that there's an odd lack of movement or action regarding his case, even 4 years later. The investigators said that a lot of that at the time stemmed from just the general tone in the area. If this had been a beloved mother, a sweet granny, a child, a family man, there would have been more of a call to arms. But this was a flamboyant, antique-slinging gay man who made waves by existing in his conservative community. Nobody was upset by his disappearance except those who cared about him. This is a problem, but it does feed a theory line that I want to go over. Ultimately, after all is said and done, I personally only see two logical angles here. Theory one is that this was a personal charged murder, meaning someone Larry was close with, either professionally or personally, or both, wanted him dead. The man who banged on his door that fateful night is the logical suspect. Yeah, it's okay to not mourn someone's passing, especially if you had beef with them. There's no law that you need to shed tears or be upset. But he's more the logical suspect because he was the last to be with Larry before he disappeared. He was also pissed when he was with them. On top of that, he was confirmed to be selling antiques that maybe were from Larry's store. It's unclear, but antiques related to Larry in some form were sold by this dude after his disappearance. Dick, the neighbor, confirmed truck activity at the house several times after the disappearance. I mean, it just makes sense. The problem, though, is the DNA found on Larry was not a match to him. That doesn't rule him out, but it does hinder the case a bit. There could be several reasons, though. He could have had an accomplice. The results could have been diluted because of the level of decomposition. There's just a lot of factors and possibilities as to why it didn't match. Theory two for me, though, is an unrelated attack on Larry by someone outside of his social circle that took issue with his sexual orientation. People have been killed for less, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. And what feeds this theory is the climate of his town at the time, and the climate even persists today. They are not accepting of homosexuality in this neck of the woods. I wouldn't be surprised if this had a hand in his death. The dogs and the secret door really are the two things that stick out like a sore thumb in this case. They don't make sense, and I feel like that means that they are areas that need to be looked at more closely. It's probably too late to go the dog route, honestly. They are most likely no longer alive at this point. But at the time, would have checked shelters, put up flyers at local pet stores and grocery stores, etc., and see if you get any bites on them. The door, though, the door. I would have found out if Larry used this as like a safe area in his home. Did he store his prized antiques in there? Did he have employees from his business that knew about this? I feel like the door ties to the murder. You don't enter a home and kill someone and just hope and pray they have a secret door to stash the body in and hope that you locate it. Maybe a visitor before had seen it. Maybe Larry mentioned it. Maybe a friend of Durrell's knew about it from Durrell and had it out for Larry. I also wonder if maybe no one smelled or noticed the bug activity on Larry prior, because he wasn't initially in that secret trapdoor area. Dick said there was activity with people coming and going. I don't know why someone would do this, but maybe they put him in there at a later point. I just find it odd that it took 5 months to get attention from anyone to check the home in a more close manner. Maybe the winter months kept it cold and preserved him. I don't know how cold it gets in Indiana. Maybe the thawing process started and then attracted bugs and shit. I don't know. But even then, June just seems like such a long time. I don't know. It's a bit of a head scratcher. In the end, Larry deserves justice. His loved ones deserve answers, and the piece of shit that did this needs to get caught. There may not be a huge push for Larry, but he's certainly not forgotten. If anyone has information regarding his murder, please come forward. He's a human being who was loved and didn't deserve this, and now is the time. That's all for today, guys, and until next time, listeners, stay safe.